Hey guys, my name is Joseph Brendan, and in this video we are going to see how to use a Figma plugin called Figmotion to animate designs in Figma. In this video, this is what we are going to create. This animation here is what we are going to create. So to get started, all you need to do is install the Figmotion plugin. And to do that, come here, click on Browse Plugins in Community. When you get here, come in the search bar here and type in Figmotion and press the Enter key on your keyboard. Then come here at the top left section here and click on Plugins. When you click on Plugins, you'd have this show up, and this is the Figmotion plugin. Now come here and click on the Install button there. Mine is already installed. That's why I have this showing up as installed here. Now, when the plugin is installed, the next thing to do is to create what you want to animate with the Figmotion plugin. Now, first things first, create a frame layout with the frame tool like this. Select the frame tool and have something like this. Any size is okay. Now, when you create a frame layout, go ahead to create all the designs that you want to animate with Figmotion on this frame layout. Now, before we do that, I would like to come here first. I would rename this frame layout to my motion. You can call it whatever you want to call it. When I do that, I would go ahead to create the design that I want to animate on this frame layout. So I would select the rectangle tool there and I would create this shape here. I would have this be like this. I would give it a corner radius of 16 and I would change the color to this. And that's fine. Then I would select the rectangle tool once more and I would create a smaller shape like the one I created, and I would have the corner radius there be 16 also, and I would give it this color. Now I would keep this here. Then I would go ahead to create a text. So I would keep that text selected, come here and I would make it size 24, and the typeface is set to Rubik and my font style is set to bold. Now you can go with whatever works for you. That's fine still. So I would keep this here and I would select all of this and make sure it's staying at the center. That's okay. Now, this is the design that I would love to animate with the Figmotion plugin here in Figma. Now, I would like you to take note of this. When you are using Figmotion, all the elements that you would have on your frame layout like this, all of these elements that I have on my frame layout now will be called layers. For example, just to make this clearer, this rectangle here will be seen as a layer to Figmotion. This will be seen as a layer to Figmotion, and this text will be seen as a layer to Figmotion. Now, the best thing to do with your layers is to make sure that you name all your layers properly. Now let's come here, let's select this shape here. If I select it, you would see that the name of this shape is rectangle 1. Now I would go ahead and I would give it a name that I can use to identify it properly. So I can say big, tall rectangle. I would come here, I would select this and I would say short rectangle. And this text here, which is axiom, is called axiom here in the design 3. I would work with that. Now, when you create what you want to animate and you have properly named all your layers, the next thing to do is to select the frame layout. When you select it, keep it selected, then go ahead to launch the Figmotion plugin. I would come here, I would hover on Figmotion and I would select Open Figmotion, just like this. And here we have our Figmotion plugin. Now, just to have more space on our canvas for this, I would come here, I would click on our empty canvas and I would select the show or hide UI so that I can hide this panel here and the property panel here. I would have some space to work with here. Now, here is our Figmotion plugin. At this stage, we will go ahead to see how we can use this plugin to create an animation of this design that we have here. Now, on our Figmotion plugin here, you can see that we have all the layers that we have on our frame layout listed here. You can see we have axiom here, which is our text layer. We have the big, tall rectangle, which is this rectangle here. And we have the short rectangle. So you can see that all those layers are listed here. So that's why it's important to give those layers a name that you can use to identify them properly. The next thing I would like for us to see how to do here is for us to see how to manage our layers between our frame layout and the Figmotion plugin. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say as I am trying to create this animation, something comes up and there is something now that I need to add to this design. Yeah, let's come here. Let's bring back our UI here. Let's keep this here. Let's say as I am trying to create this animation, there is need for me to now have a circle here. I would come here, I would rename this from ellipse 1 to another circle. Now let's hide our UI once more. Let's bring this here. Now, as you can see, I have added a new layer to our frame layout. But if you come here in the Figmotion plugin, you would see that that new layer that I added is not listed here in Figmotion like these other layers. And the fact is this: any layer that is not listed here in Figmotion cannot be animated with Figmotion. So how do we fix this? It's simple. All you need to do is to keep the frame layout selected, then come here in Figmotion and click on the Update Layers button here. And as you can see, when I click on that Update Layers button, the another circle layer is now listed here in Figmotion, meaning that we can now animate that layer with Figmotion. Now, let's say adding this layer was not a good idea and I don't want the layer anymore, right? What I would do is I would come here in this frame layout, I would select that layer and I'll delete it. When I delete that layer from our frame layout, you would see that here in Figmotion, that layer is still listed. And that's not how it's supposed to be. So what do we do to make sure that this layer is not listed here? Because actually, we don't have that layer here on our frame layout. You do the same thing. Come here and click on the Update Layers button. When you do that, you would see that that layer is no more listed here in Figmotion. So that is all for managing our layers between our frame layout and the Figmotion plugin. So the next thing we are going to look at here in Figmotion is the properties of our layers. Now in Figmotion, each layer has its own properties, and it is only the properties of a layer that you can use to animate that layer. So the question is this: how do we see the properties of a layer? Just come here and click on any layer. I would click on the short rectangle layer. When you click on any layer here, you will see all the properties assigned to that layer show up here, just like this. Now, it is all of these properties that show up here that you can use to configure the animation of this short rectangle layer. As simple as that. So at this stage, I would like to explain these properties one after another and how they all work. Take note, all of these properties are for the short rectangle layer. So this X property here is used to set the horizontal position of this short rectangle layer during animation. And when I say horizontal position, I mean the position of this layer on a straight line when you go from left to right. Now, this Y property here is used to set the vertical position of this short rectangle layer during animation. The width property here is used to set the width of this short rectangle layer during animation. Same for the height property, same for the opacity property, same for the border radius property. Now, the border radius property here is the same thing as the corner radius property in our Figma design file. Over here, it's called border radius, not corner radius. Now, the rotation property here does the same thing. It is used to set the angle position of the layer it belongs to during animation. The fill color property here does the same thing. It's used to set the fill color property of a layer or the layer it belongs to during animation. Same for the stroke width property and same for the stroke color property. So now that we have a fair understanding of how these properties work, I'd like us to see how to use them to animate our layers. But one final thing before we do that, I'd like to tell you what this section of the Figmotion plugin is. So this section here is the timeline section in Figmotion. It is this section that you would use to set the duration of the animation. Like if you want your animation to last for 5 seconds, 2 seconds, or even 20 seconds, this is where you would set that. So let's go ahead and let's see how to put all of these into practice. So I would come here, I would click on the short rectangle to collapse all of its properties. Now, to start animating my design here, I would like to start with the big tall rectangle here. So I would come here, I would click on big tall rectangle. When I do that, I would have all of the properties for the big tall rectangle show up. Now, the next question I'd ask myself is, how do I want to animate the big tall rectangle? In my case, I would like the big tall rectangle to slide in from the left here. So if an object is sliding in from the left on a straight line, it means that that object is going on its horizontal axis, and the horizontal axis is the x-axis. So what I would do to make that happen is I would come here and I would use the x property here of the big tall rectangle to set that. So in front of the x property here, what I'll do is I would click on this little icon here. When I click on it, you'd see that an icon here will be created, and this icon that is created in the timeline section now is created under the 0 milliseconds time frame. As you can see, this is 0 milliseconds, and under 0 milliseconds we have 0 seconds. So this icon here is indicating to me that the X property animation that I am trying to create will start at 0 milliseconds. Now, the next thing I'll do is I would like to set the duration that I would want that animation to last for. So how do I do that? I would want that animation to go for about 1 second, yeah? So I would click on that icon, drag it. You would see that if I leave my mouse, this blue line will be created. So you can come here and drag this till you get to 1000 milliseconds, which is actually 1 second. So to be sure that you are actually at 1 second exactly, come here and click on this icon here. When you click on that point, this point here, you can see where my mouse cursor is on. When you click on it, you would have this property box show up. Now, over here, you can set the exact seconds or the exact millisecond value that you want. So for me, I would want this to be 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second, yeah? Now, when I set that to 1000 millisecond, what I have here is the X value for the big tall rectangle at 1 second. I would explain what that means. This means that when my animation is 1 second in, the big tall rectangle will stay at a 139px position on the x-axis. Now, you may ask yourself, how do we calculate this? It's simple. That's why you have to create a frame layout first, because when you create a frame layout first, your X and Y calculations will be relative to the frame layout that you created. Now, if Figmotion is calculating the X axis for my animation, it's going to start from the end of the left side of this frame here. So the end here will be 0px. So as the big tall rectangle layer is moving in, the value of the x-axis keeps increasing. When it gets to 139px, it's going to stop here. Now you may ask yourself, why is it not coming from the right into the left? And that's because the default x-axis movement is from left to right. When you move from right to left, it becomes -x. Now the next property here is the animation property that is currently set to linear. I would come here and I would change this to ease in. And that's because I would want that big tall rectangle to move in an easy way. Now, when I set that, I would come here and I would click on OK. When I click on OK, it means that I have set the animation for the 1000 millisecond duration. Now, let's come back here. Let's click on this point here, which is our start point here, and let's set the animation for that start point. So as you can see here, the millisecond value is set to 0, which is what I want, because I want this to start at 0 millisecond. So over here it says at 0 millisecond, the big tall rectangle will be on a 139px position on the x-axis. And that does not make sense, because if the start point is 139 and the end point is 139, it means that our big tall rectangle will just stay at that position when it starts and when it ends. So I'd like the start position for that big tall rectangle to be set to 0. And me setting this to 0 means that when the animation starts at 0 millisecond, this big tall rectangle will be coming in from the end of our frame here, which is the 0px position on the x-axis. So I would set that to 0 and I would click on OK here. And as you can see, the big tall rectangle has just moved to that start point. So for us to preview what we are doing as we are doing it, come here in Figmotion, you would see a play button there. Click on it. When you click on it, you would see that that's how it's going to move in, just like this. Now, the next thing I would like to do is this. I would like to say when the animation starts at 0 millisecond, I wouldn't want the blue color to be there. Like I would want it to come in faded to have that vision effect. Now, which property here will I use to do that? I would come here and I would select the fill color property here. I would click on this icon in front of fill color to have this timeline flow created. Now, if you come here, you would see that the timeline flow stops right under 1000 millisecond. And that's because I created the first one to stop at 1000 millisecond. Now, that does not mean that I can't reduce it or increase it. You can go ahead to reduce or increase, but I would want all of the animation effect to stop at the same time. So I would keep this here at 1000 millisecond. Now let's come here. Let's click on the start point here for the fill color property. When I click on it, you would see that I still have this setting here that says at 0 millisecond. Now at 0 millisecond, how do I want the color of the big tall rectangle to be? I would want the opacity to be at 0, because when the opacity is set to 0, it means that the blue color will not be present on that layer. So I would come here, I would select the opacity property and I'll take it downwards like this. When I do that, I would press the OK button here. And that's fine. So I would come here now and I would say at 400 milliseconds, which is at 0.4 second, I would want the opacity to increase a bit. So how do I create a point right under 400 millisecond? I would come here, click on this start point, click on that point there, hold it and drag it to 400 millisecond, or just drop it anywhere at all. When you drop it, leave your mouse, you'd see that a point will be created here. Now you can click on that point, come here and set this to 400. Now I would say when the animation is at 0.4 seconds, I would want this to be set to ease in so that I would have a smooth flow. Now when the animation is at 400 millisecond, I would like the opacity value to be increased to a point like this. I would come here and I would click on OK, and that's set. So I would come here, like under 700 millisecond, I would like that opacity property to go back to 0 again, just to create an effect. So I would come here, I would click here, hold and drag, then click on it. I would set this to 700. I would set this to ease in and come here and set this to 0. The opacity property, I would set it to 0. Then I would click on OK. Now, after this 700 millisecond, the opacity value will go back to 100 here. So I would come here and I would click on the end point here and I'll change this from linear to ease in. Now, I would always advise you to change that property from linear to ease in or ease out or ease in out. Linear is kind of glitchy. So I would come here and as you can see at the end point, the opacity property is set to 100. Then I would click on OK. Now, if I come here now and I click on the play button, you would see that effect. And that's it. So another thing I would like to do is this. I would like to reduce the height of that big tall rectangle when it's coming in, then increase it and bring it back in again. So how do I do that? I would come here, I would use the height property for that. I would click on it for this to be created. Now at the start point, I would click on the start point here and I would say when this animation is 0 millisecond, let the height of that big tall rectangle be set to 20. And when it gets to 400 millisecond, I would create an effect for that. So I'll bring this here. I would say at 400 millisecond, let the height be set to 80 and let this be an ease in action. Then when it gets to 700 millisecond, let the height go up before it comes down. So I would come here, I would create this at 700 millisecond, and I would set this to ease in out. Then I would set this to 200, or let's say 160 actually. Then I would click on OK. Now when I come here, you'd see that I have this effect right at the same time with this fill color effect. Now after this effect, the height of that big tall rectangle will go back to normal. Then at the end point, I would come here and I'll just set this to ease in. Now let's click on OK, come back here and let's click on play. You can see that effect now. And that's cool. Now, I would say for now, I am okay with my animation of that big tall rectangle. And this is for the sake of time actually. You can go ahead and play around with all the other properties that you have here. So I would come here, I would click on the big tall rectangle layout to collapse its properties. Now, I would want to animate the short rectangle layer. So I would click on it for its properties to show up. And for the short rectangle layer, I would just want to animate it easily. I would just want it to slide in from the top. So sliding in from the top means that it is moving on the vertical axis, which is the Y axis. So I would come here in front of Y. I would click on this icon here. And when I click on it, you would see that it automatically stretches the timeline frame to 1000 millisecond. Now, in this case, I would like this Y-axis animation to last for more than 1000 millisecond, which is 1 second. I would like it to last for 1500 millisecond, which is 1.5 seconds. I would come here, I would set this to ease in, and I would click on OK. And as you can see, it has been stretched to this point. So I would come back here, I would click on this start point here, and I would say when the animation is at 0 millisecond, let the position of that short rectangle on the Y-axis be set to 0. Let's come here and you can see how that works. Now, I would also like to play around with the color presence of that short rectangle. So I would come here right in front of fill color. I would have this. I would say at 0, let the opacity be 0. Then I would come here. I would say at, let's say, 600 milliseconds, at ease in, let the opacity rise to this. And that's fine. Now at the end here, I would come here and I would just set this to ease in. And over here, you can see that the opacity is set to 100%. And I would click OK there. Now when I come here and I click on the play button, you would see that we have that. And that's okay. So I would click on it to collapse its properties. Now, at this stage, I'd like for us to animate the axiom text that we have here. I would click on it for its properties to show up. So for this axiom text layer, I would just like to play around with the size of that text. So I would come here and you would see that I have a font size property that I can use for that. So I would just come here, click on it, and I would have this time frame line created. Now, at the beginning of the animation, I would like the font family to be 8. Now, when the animation gets to, let's say, 800 milliseconds, yeah, let's create a new point. When this gets to 800 milliseconds at ease in out, I would like for the font size of that text to be set to 32. And after that, let's say at 1000 milliseconds, let's just play around with it. At ease in, I would like this to be set to 16. Now, after 1000 milliseconds, the font size of that text will go back to normal, which is 24. And I would end this with an ease in animation setting. And that's okay. Now, I would click on OK, come here, click on this to see what we have. And that's what we have. So I'd like you to go ahead and create your own animation with Figmotion and then render the animation as an MP4 file with a frame rate of 30 or 60. When you do that, click on render, and when you render it, tag me on social media for me to see what you have done. My Twitter handle is Joe_Brendan_. Now, if you like this content, click on the subscribe button and like this video. Thanks for your time and look out for more content.